The Bible is a big story as vast as the twinkling night sky, made up of 66 wondrous books, each filled with adventures, wonders, and lessons of love. Some say these stories are like a treasure chest of secrets, sharing tales of brave heroes, kind hearts, and even moments when the world itself was born. Today, we're going to embark on an extraordinary journey, beginning with a time when nothing existed except a big, mysterious emptiness. Are you ready? Let's open the book of beginnings, Genesis, and discover how everything came to be. Once upon a time, before there were any stars, trees, or even giggles of laughter, there was only a deep, dark silence, a vast, empty canvas. Then, with a voice as gentle as a lullaby and as powerful as a thunderclap, God the Creator spoke the very first words, "Let there be light." And suddenly, out of the darkness, burst brilliant beams that chased away the shadows. Imagine the excitement, like a sparkly firework lighting up a pitch-black sky. The world soon woke up in a dazzling display of colors and sounds. The sky swirled with soft blues and bright pinks as clouds danced across like friendly giants, and the earth below began to rumble with life. Mighty oceans, sparkling rivers, and tall, gentle mountains came into being, all carefully crafted by a loving hand. Each flower, leaf, and drop of water was a part of a beautiful puzzle that the Creator put together just for us. On the sixth day of this magical creation, something extra special happened. The Creator took a pinch of the soft, earthy dust and with a loving whisper breathed life into it. And just like that, a very special person named Adam came to be, the very first man. His eyes shone with wonder as he looked at the breathtaking world around him. But the story did not end there. Soon after, Adam's best friend, a kind and gentle soul named Eve, was formed. Together they were to live in a place that was as lovely as a fairy tale, a magnificent garden called Eden. Imagine a garden where every step sparkles with magic. Eden was filled with sparkling streams that giggled over pebbles, trees that bowed with heavy, juicy fruit, and flowers that swayed to a secret melody. The air was fresh and sweet, like a picnic on a sunny day, and every animal, from tiny, chirpy birds to playful, bounding deer, roamed freely, as if they were all part of one big, happy family. In the heart of this wondrous garden stood one very special tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Its branches spread wide, inviting curious eyes to take a closer look. The Creator told Adam and Eve, "You can enjoy everything in this garden, but please don't eat the fruit from this one tree." It was like a magical rule, meant to keep their hearts safe and full of trust, much like listening to your parents' gentle advice. For a while, everything was perfect. Adam and Eve spent their days exploring, laughing, and marveling at the beauty around them. They would chat with the birds and share secrets with the whispering winds. But one day, something curious happened. A sly little serpent with eyes that twinkled mischievously slithered closer. With a smooth, hissing voice, the serpent asked, "Are you sure you must not taste that shiny, mysterious fruit?" It promised secret wisdom and a power to see the world in a completely new light. Eve, with a heart full of wonder and a mind buzzing with questions, took a bite of the fruit. And guess what? Adam, who loved her dearly and shared her sense of adventure, joined in. In that single, unexpected moment, everything changed. The sparkling clarity of their paradise was touched by a shadow, a bittersweet mix of excitement and deep sadness. After tasting the fruit, Adam and Eve discovered something surprising. They could feel both the magic and the mystery of the world all at once. They realized that they weren't as invincible as they once thought, and that sometimes even the most delightful adventures come with new challenges. When they heard the Creator coming to walk in the garden, their hearts pounded and they quickly hid behind the leaves, feeling shy and a bit afraid. The Creator, who loved them more than all the stars in the sky, gently asked, "Where are you?" With heavy hearts and tearful eyes, Adam and Eve stepped forward. God explained that because they had not followed the simple rule, things would never be quite the same again. The garden, once their joyful home, would now be a reminder of both the beauty of life and the lessons learned from making mistakes. Even though Adam and Eve had to leave Eden, the story wasn't all gloomy. Their journey was filled with new adventures, sometimes exciting, sometimes a little sad, but always full of lessons about God's love, consequences, and hope. Their departure from the garden was like leaving a magical playground to discover the wider world, with all its wonders and mysteries waiting to be unraveled. As time went on, the legacy of that very first choice echoed throughout all of creation. Every sunrise reminded us that every day is a fresh start, every star a little whisper of magic. The story of Genesis is not just about the beginning of the world. It's about discovering the wonder in every moment, about daring to dream and explore, and about knowing that love and hope are always around the corner, waiting to guide us back home. A long time passed after Adam and Eve left their magical garden, and life began anew in the wide, open world. Adam and Eve built a humble home where they learned to work the land and care for each other. They soon welcomed two sons into their family, Cain, who became a hard-working farmer, and Abel, who lovingly cared for flocks of gentle animals. Every day, as the sun climbed high and the birds sang cheerful tunes, the brothers would bring special gifts to show their thankfulness to God. Abel offered the very best of his flock, with every animal cared for as if it were a dear friend. Cain, however, brought offerings from the fruits of his labors. Though both tried their hardest, only Abel's heartfelt gift found favor with God. Seeing this, Cain's heart began to fill with a storm of jealousy and anger. It was as if a grumpy little monster, hidden in the shadows of his thoughts, whispered, "Your gift isn't enough." But in a soft, caring voice, God warned him, "Sin is crouching at your door, waiting to make a friend with you. But you must learn to rule it, so it never rules you." This gentle reminder was meant to teach Cain that every choice has a consequence, and that unchecked anger can lead even the bravest hearts down a dangerous road. But poor Cain did not heed the warning. Overwhelmed by jealousy, he led his brother Abel into a quiet field, a place where secrets and shadows mingled, and in a moment filled with heartbreak and confusion, Cain hurt Abel so deeply that the light in his brother's eyes went dim. When God asked Cain about this tragic act, Cain replied with a sorrowful and puzzling question, "Am I my brother's keeper?" A question that echoed far and wide, reminding everyone that we share the duty of caring for one another. As time went on, Cain was forced to wander away from everything he once knew, a life marked by loneliness and regret, a painful lesson that anger and jealousy can break even the strongest bonds of family. Generations rolled by like soft waves on a shore, and people multiplied and spread across the land. Yet as they grew, many began to forget the gentle ways of the Creator. The world became filled with quarrels and shadows, and the Creator's heart ached for the beauty that was lost among the people. But even in these troubled times, one man shone bright like a guiding star. His name was Noah. Noah was a kind and faithful soul who always listened to God. In a world that had lost its gentle way, Noah's heart remained true, and he walked with God every day. Seeing his goodness, the Creator decided it was time for a fresh start, a chance to wash away the sorrow and begin anew. God told Noah to build a huge boat called an ark, a magical vessel that could shelter him, his family, and every kind of animal from a great cleansing flood. Imagine Noah, with sweat on his brow and hope in his eyes, hammering and building for many long years. Though others laughed and doubted him, Noah never wavered. Then, one day, the skies grew dark with heavy, rumbling clouds, and soft, persistent drops of rain began to fall. The rain came and came, day after day, until for 40 long days and nights the world was filled with water. The mighty ark floated over mountains and cities, carrying Noah's family and pairs of every creature through the storm. At last, the water began to ebb away, and the ark found a resting place atop a high mountain called Ararat. Stepping out into a brand new world, Noah and his family felt the cool, fresh air and saw a bright, promising sky. And then, as if painted by the hand of the Creator, a glorious rainbow arched across the heavens, a dazzling, colorful promise that never again would he destroy the earth with a flood. This shining bow in the sky remains a symbol of hope and faith, a reminder that even when the world seems wild and out of control, God's love endures. But as the earth healed and the people began to fill it again, many found it hard to remember the lessons of the past. Noah's descendants multiplied and gathered on the vast open plains of Shinar. With hearts brimming with pride and ambition, they decided to build a great tower, a towering monument meant to reach the very heavens. They called it Babel, hoping that by touching the sky, they could make a name for themselves. Yet in their pride, they forgot the gentle wisdom of humility and the importance of staying close to the Creator. In a surprising twist, God stepped in once more. With a wave of divine power, he mixed up their language so that the builders could no longer understand one another. In the midst of the confusion, they scattered across the earth, each group forming its own little family, its own nation. The Tower of Babel became a shining lesson, a reminder that unity without humility can lead to great division, and that true greatness comes from remembering and following God's loving ways. Even after all this, God's plan was not yet finished. Out of all the scattered people, God chose one man to begin a new and exciting chapter, a chapter filled with promises of hope and redemption. This man was Abram, a 75-year-old wanderer with no children of his own. One quiet night, as the stars twinkled like little lanterns, Abram heard a gentle, commanding voice calling him to leave his familiar world and journey into the unknown. God promised Abram that he would become the father of a magnificent nation, and that through him all the families of the earth would be blessed. Imagine Abram gazing up at the night sky as he listened, counting the countless stars and dreaming of all the wonderful descendants yet to come. Even though Abram was old and his wife Sarai had never borne a child, he stepped forward in faith. In time, God changed Abram's name to Abraham, which means father of many, and changed Sarai's name to Sarah, promising that even the most impossible dreams could come true. Against all odds, when Abraham reached the grand age of 100, Sarah gave birth to a wonderful son named Isaac, the child of promise, whose arrival marked the beginning of a sacred covenant that would eventually lead to the greatest gift of all. Isaac grew up surrounded by love and wonder, and he married a kind woman named Rebekah. Together, they welcomed twin sons into their family, Esau and Jacob. Though Esau was born first, it was the clever and determined Jacob who sought his father's blessing in a most unexpected way. In a twist of fate, Jacob had to flee from his older brother's anger, setting him off on a long journey through lands both strange and wondrous. One night, while resting in a quiet place, Jacob had an incredible dream, a ladder stretching from the earth up to heaven, with angels happily climbing up and down, carrying messages of hope and light. In that magical moment, God spoke to Jacob once more, renewing the promise made to Abraham. Jacob's heart was stirred by the promise of care and protection, even as he faced many challenges ahead. In time, Jacob's life was filled with struggles and surprises. One unforgettable night, he wrestled with a mysterious presence, a divine visitor whose strength and love reshaped his very being. As the night turned to dawn, Jacob emerged with a limp, a sign of the night's incredible struggle, and with a new name, Israel, which means he struggles with God. This powerful moment showed that even when life is full of challenges, God never leaves us alone. Among all of Jacob's children, there was one son whose story would shine like a brilliant beacon, Joseph, the beloved son born when Jacob was very old. Joseph's life was a whirlwind of adventures and challenges. His brothers, overcome by jealousy, sold him into slavery far away in Egypt. Yet, even as Joseph faced hardship and even found himself in prison, God's plan was unfolding. Through every twist and turn, Joseph's kindness and courage shone brightly until he rose to become a trusted advisor to Pharaoh, the mighty ruler of Egypt. During a time of great hunger, when the land was parched and the people's bellies ached, Joseph's wisdom guided his family to safety. His brothers, who had once betrayed him, came to Egypt seeking food, not knowing that the kind, wise man before them was their very own brother. With a heart full of forgiveness and understanding, Joseph revealed his true self and embraced his brothers, saying, "What you meant for evil, God meant for good." His words teach everyone that even the hardest times could be transformed into something beautiful through forgiveness and trust in God. As the story of Genesis drew to a close, the descendants of Abraham flourished in Egypt, thanks to Joseph's remarkable legacy. But in Egypt, a new ruler arose, one whose heart was troubled by the growing numbers and strength of the Israelites. The once safe home in Egypt became a place of hard labor and sorrow. The people were forced to work under the weight of heavy burdens, their cries of pain and longing echoing through the busy streets and grand marketplaces. Despite the splendor of Egypt, with its towering structures and bustling bazaars, the suffering of the Israelites could not be hidden. In the midst of their despair, the Israelites lifted their voices in heartfelt prayers, crying out for help, and God, who had always watched over his children with tender care, heard their cries. Remembering the ancient promises made long ago, he was stirred with compassion and set the stage for a rescue plan that would change everything, a rescue filled with wonder, hope, and the promise of a better tomorrow. Long ago in the book of Exodus, a very special baby was born to the Hebrew people. This baby, named Moses, arrived when danger loomed over his family because of a cruel decree. His brave mother, with a heart full of love and determination, gently placed him in a tiny basket made of reeds, setting it adrift on the flowing Nile. Picture this, a little bundle floating on a sparkling river, carried by the gentle current and cradled by a mother's hope. As the basket meandered along the winding Nile, it caught the eye of Pharaoh's kind-hearted daughter. With eyes full of compassion, she lifted the baby from the water and took him into her warm embrace. In the soft corridors of the royal palace, Moses grew up surrounded by luxury, yet his heart always whispered the songs of his true heritage. Torn between the glimmering life of Egypt and the memory of his own people, Moses carried a secret longing deep inside. One day, as Moses wandered among the bustling streets of Egypt, he witnessed a scene that made his heart thump with sorrow and anger. A powerful Egyptian man striking a Hebrew slave. Overcome with a surge of protective love and fierce justice, Moses intervened. In a moment filled with both bravery and heartbreak, he struck the man down. Fearing the consequences of his actions, Moses fled away from Egypt, disappearing into the quiet embrace of the wilderness in Midian. Here, amid gentle winds and endless sands, Moses found a new life as a humble shepherd, where he cared for his flock and listened to the whispering secrets of the desert. One bright and mysterious day, while tending his sheep near a rugged mountain, Moses saw something that made his eyes widen with wonder. A bush that blazed with bright dancing flames. But here's the magic. The bush was on fire, yet not a single leaf was lost to the flames. Drawn by curiosity, Moses stepped closer, his little heart pounding like a drum. Suddenly, from the fiery bush came a warm, booming voice calling, "Moses! Moses!" Startled yet listening intently, Moses answered, "I'm here." The voice revealed itself to be that of the great Creator, the one who had formed the stars and the rolling hills. God spoke with love and kindness, sharing with Moses the tale of the suffering of his people. the Israelites, who longed to be free from the heavy chains of bondage. With a gentle yet firm tone, God chose Moses for a very important mission, to return to Egypt and ask Pharaoh to let his people go free. Although Moses felt small and unsure, God promised, "I will be with you every step of your journey." With courage sparkling like fireflies in his eyes, Moses gathered his strength and, joined by his caring brother Aaron, set off back to Egypt. In the grand halls of Pharaoh's palace, Moses boldly spoke, "Let my people go." Yet Pharaoh's heart was as hard as stone, and he refused to listen. To help Moses, the Creator sent a series of awe-inspiring miracles, plagues that danced like strange magic over Egypt. First, the mighty Nile turned deep red as if it were filled with ruby juice. Then, frogs began to hop everywhere, filling the rooms and halls with their cheerful croaks. Soon after, tiny insects and swarms of flies made the air buzz with mysterious energy, and even the bright sunshine was swallowed by a thick, heavy darkness that blanketed the land. As each incredible sign unfolded, Pharaoh's stubborn heart only grew firmer. The final, most heart-touching miracle came when a great sorrow fell upon Egypt, a sorrow that swept away every firstborn son, except in homes marked with the gentle sign of lamb's blood. This sacred night, known as Passover, was a shimmering promise of salvation, a whisper of a future hope for all who believed. At last, overwhelmed by grief and the magic of these wonders, Pharaoh relented and allowed the Israelites to leave. With Moses as their shining guide, they hurried out of Egypt, their feet barely touching the cool, smooth ground as they stepped into the unknown. Yet even as freedom glittered on the horizon, challenges awaited. Pharaoh's heart, though softened for a moment, soon hardened again, and his mighty army began to chase after the fleeing people. Imagine the Israelites, hearts pounding like wild drums, trapped between a vast roaring sea and the determined footsteps of Pharaoh's soldiers. With a deep, comforting whisper, God told Moses to raise his staff. In a scene as magical as it was miraculous, the turbulent waters split apart into towering walls on either side, creating a dry pathway lined with sparkling water. One by one, the people walked across the bed of the once mighty sea, their eyes wide with wonder at the sight of such an impossible path. As the last of them reached safe ground, the walls of water crashed together with a thunderous roar, sweeping away the soldiers like grains of sand in a storm. The journey was far from over. The vast wilderness ahead was a land of trials and miracles alike. The Israelites wandered through deserts where the sun blazed fiercely by day and the stars whispered secrets by night. When hunger crept in, God sent down a special bread from heaven called manna, delicate as dew and sweet as a secret treat. When thirst parched their lips, water flowed from a rock, cool and clear, like the promise of a gentle rain. After many days under the wide, endless sky, the people reached the foot of a great mountain called Sinai. Here, the air filled with the sound of rolling thunder and swirling smoke as the God spoke directly to the people. In this majestic moment, he shared the 10 Commandments, loving rules that were not just laws, but a special promise and guide for living in harmony with each other and with the divine. These sacred words painted a picture of a community built on justice, kindness, and a gentle, caring spirit. Yet, even surrounded by the radiant glow of God's presence, the people sometimes lost their way. Their hearts, like wandering fireflies, flickered with impatience. In a moment of confusion, they crafted a golden calf, a shiny idol they could see and hold, to fill the emptiness of waiting. When Moses came down from the mountain and saw what they had done, his heart ached so deeply that he broke the stone tablets in anger. But in that tender moment, God's love shone through once more, forgiving and renewing the covenant with fresh, gleaming tablets, a promise that no mistake was too big to mend. As the journey continued, he gave Moses wondrous instructions to build the tabernacle, a portable sacred tent where the divine presence could dwell among the people. Every golden lamp, every carefully crafted piece sparkled with the promise of holiness and the desire for closeness with God. The tabernacle became a moving home for the God's Spirit, a bright beacon guiding the people through the ever-changing wilderness. In another part of these ancient stories, the people learned how to come close to the divine through acts of worship and offerings. The book of Leviticus, with its detailed rituals and heartfelt ceremonies, taught them that every sacrifice was a bridge, a way to wash away sadness and start anew. When an Israelite brought an animal to the tabernacle, laying a gentle hand on its head, it was a way of sharing the heavy load of mistakes and finding forgiveness. On a very special day called the Day of Atonement, the high priest would enter the sacred space, sprinkling precious blood on a golden seat, while a gentle goat was sent away, carrying the people's sorrows far into the wilderness. This deep, thoughtful ritual whispered of a future sacrifice so pure that it would mend the broken bridge between the people and the divine. The instructions in Leviticus also showed the people how to live every day with a heart full of gratitude, kindness, and respect. Every meal, every work, and every smile was a chance to honor the special promise they shared with God, a promise that colored their lives with goodness and joy. As the Israelites wandered further through the vast, rolling sands, their story unfolded like a grand adventure of learning and growing. In the book of Numbers, the people gathered together, counted like stars in the sky, and prepared for the next part of their journey, a journey toward a promised land of flowing milk and honey. Brave scouts, like little explorers, ventured into the new land, discovering hills lush with grapes and valleys brimming with promise. But their reports were mixed. While some saw a land rich with dreams, many spoke of giant warriors and mighty cities. Fear began to weave its way into the hearts of the people, and doubts, like dark clouds, covered their dreams. Because of this uncertainty, God gently set a new course. The people would wander the wilderness for 40 long years, a journey as long as the seasons, so that every heart might learn the true strength of trust and the bright light of faith. During these years, God was never far away. He provided food when their tummies grumbled and water when their lips grew dry, reminding them always that His loving presence was their true home. Yet not every step was easy. In the vastness of the wilderness, some hearts grew proud and restless. A man named Korah, along with his friends, questioned the leadership of Moses and Aaron, their voices filled with envy and uncertainty. In a dramatic moment of divine power, the very earth opened up, gently swallowing those who had chosen pride over kindness. This astonishing event reminded everyone that each person had a special place in God's plan, and that humility and unity were the keys to a happy, peaceful life. Over the long, winding years, as the people's journey continued, God's guiding hand helped shape not just the land around them, but the very hearts of the Israelites. As they neared the edge of the long-awaited Promised Land, their story was filled with lessons learned, challenges met, and a growing, unbreakable bond with the divine. Moses, now wise with years of wandering and filled with a deep, gentle love for his people, gathered them close on the slopes of a majestic mountain. Before a new generation, children who had not seen the miracles of Egypt or the wonders of Sinai, Moses spoke softly, sharing the long tale of their escape, the miracles in the wilderness, and the sacred promises made to their ancestors. His words, full of hope and gentle guidance, reminded them of God's love that had carried them through every storm and every bright, shining moment. With every word, Moses painted a picture of a life filled with the Creator's miracles. His gentle reminders invited the people to remember the warmth of freedom, to hold close the lessons learned from both joy and sorrow, and to trust that every step was guided by a love that would never fade away. When Moses' time had passed like the last page of a cherished story, a brave new leader stepped forward, Joshua, a kind-hearted and determined protege of Moses, chosen to lead the people of Israel to a land they had dreamed about for so long, Canaan. Imagine a young hero standing at the edge of a mighty river, the Jordan, with its waters rushing and sparkling under the sun. Even though the river looked wild and impossible to cross, a gentle, assuring voice from above whispered, "Be strong and courageous, Joshua. Do not be afraid. I will be with you." And so, with his heart full of hope and a brave smile on his face, Joshua led his people forward. On that very day, something truly marvelous happened. At God's command, the priests carrying the holy ark of the covenant stepped into the flowing water. As their feet touched the riverbed, the rushing waters split in two, forming a perfect dry path. It was a sight just as wondrous as the parting of the Red Sea, a sparkling miracle that reminded everyone that the same loving God who freed them from Egypt was now guiding them into a bright new chapter. Soon after this incredible crossing, Joshua and the people set their eyes on another challenge. Ahead lay the mighty city of Jericho, surrounded by towering walls that seemed as solid as castle fortresses in fairy tales. But God had a surprising plan. For 6 whole days, the people marched quietly around the city, led by priests blowing golden trumpets and hearts filled with quiet faith. On the 7th day, they marched around the city not once, not twice, but 7 times. And then, at Joshua's bold command, all the people shouted together with one great mighty cry. With a rumble like the sound of a giant's footsteps, the massive walls tumbled down. This victory was a magical reminder that sometimes listening carefully and obeying even the strangest instructions can lead to amazing triumphs. But as often happens in great adventures, not every day was filled with victory. After the fall of Jericho, the people faced a surprising setback. They marched towards a small, unassuming city called Ai, only to meet defeat. Joshua's heart grew heavy with sadness, and he looked up for answers. God then gently revealed that someone had not followed his special instructions. Someone had taken treasures that were meant to be given back to God. The culprit, a man named Achan, admitted his mistake when confronted, and the consequences were very serious. This moment taught everyone that even a small act of disobedience can have big effects, and that true success comes from being faithful and kind. As word of these wondrous events spread, another curious tale began to unfold. A group of people called the Gibeonites, who lived near the land of Canaan, had heard about all the victories of Israel. Worried for their own safety, they disguised themselves as weary travelers from faraway lands and approached Joshua with a request for peace. Even though Joshua later learned of their clever trick, he honored the treaty he had made with them. The Gibeonites became helpers, a living reminder that sometimes, even when surprises come in disguise, kindness and fairness must guide every decision. The adventure continued when 5 fierce Amorite kings joined forces to attack Gibeon, the new friend of Israel. Without a moment's hesitation, Joshua and his loyal army marched through the night, ready to protect their allies. In a breathtaking moment of wonder, the skies opened up with hailstones that pelted the enemy, and then, as if by magic, the sun itself seemed to pause in the sky, its light lingering longer than ever before. This marvelous act reassured everyone that the power of God was on their side, shining like a brilliant beacon of hope. Inspired by these miracles, Joshua led his people in a series of bold campaigns, one after another, slowly taking over the southern cities of Canaan and fulfilling the ancient promise made to their forefathers. After many years of spirited battles and tireless effort, the land was finally tamed, and Joshua set about dividing it among the 12 tribes of Israel. Each tribe received its own special inheritance, a piece of the land where they could build homes, raise families, and live according to the gentle laws of their God. In this land, every hill and valley was a vivid reminder of the sacred promise, and every new dawn whispered the possibility of a joyful future. As the years passed, Joshua gathered the people together for heartfelt words of guidance. With eyes that sparkled with wisdom and a voice full of love, he urged everyone to remember the miracles they had witnessed and to hold fast to the promises they had made to God. His stirring words, "Choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord," filled every heart with determination and a sense of purpose. Even as Joshua's own journey came to an end, his words echoed like a sweet song in the hearts of his people, leaving them with a promise to remain true to their faith. Yet, life in the new land was not without its trials. When the mighty leader's guidance was no longer there, the people's hearts began to waver. A time came when many forgot the wonders of the past and the goodness of the one who had delivered them. This marked the beginning of a period where the people wandered in cycles, times of happiness and success, followed by moments of struggle and sorrow. In these trying times, when the people felt lost and alone, they would cry out in their distress. And with gentle compassion, God would raise up temporary champions known as judges, wise and brave leaders who would step forward to help guide them back to the path of righteousness. One of such champions was Deborah, a wise and courageous prophetess who became a judge. With a heart as bold as a lion's and a mind as clear as a sparkling stream, Deborah led the people into a great battle against the oppressive Canaanite king Jabin. She called upon a young warrior named Barak to lead the charge, and though he felt a flutter of hesitation, Deborah promised him that honor would shine brightly on a woman who fought with courage and conviction. And when Jabin's mighty commander Sisera fled from the battlefield, he found unexpected refuge in the tent of a brave woman named Jael. With a surprise that no one could have foreseen, Jael took swift action, ensuring that victory belonged to those who followed the path of truth and courage. Together, Deborah and Jael showed everyone that the strength of God could work through anyone, a gentle reminder that even those who might seem small or unlikely can shine with extraordinary light. Another remarkable leader emerged in a time of uncertainty. Gideon, a man who, despite feeling very ordinary and small, was called to be a mighty warrior. At first, Gideon was hiding in a quiet winepress, tending his wheat in secret, when suddenly an angel appeared with a message that he was destined for greatness. Though Gideon doubted his own strength, God showed him that true power comes from trust and obedience. When Gideon gathered an army, God, with a twinkle in his eye, reduced their number from thousands to just 300 brave souls. Armed only with torches, clay jars, and trumpets, these few warriors sent the fearsome Midianite army into a chaotic frenzy, proving that even the smallest group can achieve great things when they believe and follow with all their hearts. In the midst of these stirring adventures, a gentle tale of love and loyalty began to bloom, a story that would later show how hope can rise from the saddest of places. In a time of hardship, when a terrible famine struck the land of Bethlehem, a woman named Naomi, along with her husband Elimelech and their 2 sons, left their home to find food in a distant land called Moab. There, Naomi's sons married 2 kind-hearted women, Orpah and Ruth. But then, sorrow touched their lives as Naomi lost her beloved husband and later both of her sons, leaving her and her daughters-in-law with heavy hearts and empty hands. Feeling that there was no more hope in Moab, Naomi decided to return to Bethlehem. With a heavy heart, she urged Orpah to stay behind and rebuild her life, but Ruth, with unwavering loyalty shining in her eyes, gently took Naomi's hand and said, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God." With these heartfelt words, Ruth showed bravery and devotion that warmed the soul, stepping into the unknown with trust and love. When Ruth and Naomi arrived in Bethlehem, they had little more than hope and each other. Ruth began to gather leftover grains from the fields, a simple act that brought sustenance and a ray of light into their lives. By a stroke of divine guidance, Ruth found herself working in the fields of a kind and generous man named Boaz, who was a close relative of Naomi's family. Boaz, struck by Ruth's gentle spirit and diligent work, made sure she was safe and well-fed, opening his heart and home to her in a way that hinted at even greater blessings. Naomi, wise as the ancient trees, saw a golden opportunity in this act of kindness. She explained to Ruth that Boaz was what the people called a kinsman redeemer, someone who, by family custom, could marry and protect the woman he loved, thus restoring honor and hope. That very night, with the soft glow of the moon and the rustle of the threshing floor, Ruth approached Boaz with quiet courage, asking him to show his care by symbolically spreading his garment over her. In that tender moment, filled with vulnerability and trust, Boaz's heart overflowed with compassion, and he agreed to honor her in a way that would weave their destinies together. Later, Boaz fulfilled his promise by marrying Ruth, and together they welcomed a joyful son named Obed. In time, Obed would become the grandfather of a great king, a gentle reminder that even in the midst of loss and hardship, love and faith can create new beginnings that shine brightly through the generations. Meanwhile, another inspiring chapter was unfolding, a tale of a devoted mother named Hannah. Deep in her heart, Hannah longed for a child, and though her days were shadowed by sorrow and loneliness, she poured out her heart to God with a promise: if he blessed her with a son, she would dedicate him to his service. And God, in his unfailing kindness, heard her prayer. Hannah's dream came true, and she lovingly named her son Samuel. From a tender age, Samuel grew up surrounded by the gentle rhythms of worship and wisdom, serving under the guidance of the priest Eli. Samuel's voice, as clear and strong as a morning song, would one day lead his people with the wisdom of God, shining through every word. Now, imagine a time where the people began to feel the weight of the world around them. In a time long, long ago, as Israel grew older, whispers of change rustled through the hearts of its people. They looked around at the mighty nations with their powerful kings and armies and began to dream of having a king of their own, someone like the leaders of other lands. Even though the wise prophet Samuel, who had cared for them like a loving guide, tried to warn them that a king might bring troubles, like having to give up their sons to be soldiers, their daughters to serve in grand palaces, and even a bit of their harvest as taxes, the people kept on insisting. And so, with hearts both heavy and hopeful, God listened to their plea and asked Samuel to choose a king. That king was a man named Saul, chosen to be Israel's very first monarch. Saul began his journey with humble footsteps. He was brave and gentle at first, walking the path of leadership with kindness in his heart. But as time passed and his power grew, a change came over him, a change that made his heart swell with pride. One day, during a very important ceremony, Saul decided to offer a sacrifice all by himself, a task meant only for the priests. Later on, he also failed to completely follow God's instructions by leaving some of the enemy's treasures untouched. These missteps, like little cracks in a beautiful vase, grew with each mistake until God's gentle whisper of disapproval became clear. With a heavy heart, the wise Samuel had to share the sad news. God had chosen another man, one whose heart beat just like his own. That special man was a young shepherd boy named David. Picture David, with a playful smile and a slingshot in his hand, caring for his flock of sheep under the wide open sky. One day, as he visited his brothers on the battlefield, a fearsome giant named Goliath, towering like a mountain and clad in heavy armor, roared and mocked the people of Israel. But David, though small in stature, had a heart as mighty as a lion's. With nothing but a sling and 5 smooth, round stones from the stream, he stepped forward with a burst of courage and faith. In one swift, determined throw, David sent a stone soaring straight to the giant, and with that single act of bravery, the giant tumbled down. In that shining moment, David's faith lit up like a bright beacon, and the people cheered, knowing that even the smallest among them could change the world when guided by trust in God. Yet, the path to greatness was not free of bumps. David's triumph over Goliath stirred a storm of jealousy in King Saul's heart. The once proud king began to see David not as a brave young hero, but as a rival, someone who might take away the throne. Saul's envy grew, turning into a deep, simmering anger that forced David to flee into the wild, hiding among rocky caves and whispering winds. For many years, David lived as a wanderer, always on the move and careful not to harm Saul, for even in exile he remembered that Saul was still chosen by God once. Through these trials, David learned the true meaning of patience, humility, and the art of waiting for the right moment, lessons that made his heart grow wiser and kinder with every passing day. As the pages of time turned, a sorrowful end came for King Saul. In a fierce battle against the Philistines, when his strength began to fade and the shadow of defeat loomed large, Saul faced a moment of deep despair. With wounds too many and hope slipping away, he chose to end his own life rather than be captured, and so his reign, which had begun with so much promise, closed with a heavy heart. His passing cleared the path for young David, a shepherd boy who had braved giants and hardships, to rise and lead Israel to a new dawn. David's time as king blossomed like a vibrant garden after a long winter. With a heart full of courage and a mind filled with dreams, he united the scattered tribes of Israel, and his wise decisions led to the establishment of Jerusalem as a place of wonder and worship. In that city, the Ark of the Covenant, a sacred treasure symbolizing God's presence, found its home, turning Jerusalem into a bright, shining center of hope and song. David himself was a blend of a mighty warrior and a gentle poet, guiding his people with strength and compassion. Yet even a heart as brilliant as David's was not free from moments of weakness. In a day when the lines between right and wrong blurred, he made a mistake by loving a woman named Bathsheba, and, in an act to hide that error, set in motion a chain of sorrow involving her husband, Uriah. When the prophet Nathan spoke to David, the king's heart was struck with deep regret. He bowed low in sincere repentance, feeling the weight of his choices ripple through his family and his kingdom. Among the most painful chapters in David's journey was the rebellion of his own son, Absalom. Absalom, with his charm and ambition, won the hearts of many and even dared to challenge his father's authority. The family home was filled with turmoil as Absalom led a revolt, and once again, David found himself forced to flee his beloved city. The conflict grew fierce, and in the heat of battle, Absalom met a tragic end. David's heart shattered with grief, crying out in anguish for the loss of his son, a cry that echoed with the sorrow of a father's endless love. Even as David prepared to pass the treasured crown to his son Solomon, he often reflected on the winding path of his life, a tapestry woven with threads of triumph and tragedy, laughter and tears. His story, full of beautiful highs and painful lows, became a shining reminder that even flawed hearts can be redeemed by the unwavering promises of God, a promise that one day a descendant of David would reign forever, a promise carried forward in the light of a new hope. Beyond these tales of kings and the rise and fall of mighty rulers, there were other remarkable stories that wove the fabric of faith and love even tighter. One such story is that of Elisha, a gentle prophet who stepped in where the mighty Elijah had left off. When dark times covered the land, Elisha's miracles appeared like twinkling stars in a midnight sky. Small, yet dazzling reminders that God was never far away. When a town's water turned sour and bitter, Elisha, with a touch of divine grace, made it pure and sweet once more. On another day, with only a few humble loaves of bread, he fed 100 hungry men, sharing the bounty of God's care in the midst of scarcity. And perhaps the most touching moment of all was when Elisha, with a heart full of tenderness, brought a little child back to life, easing a mother's unbearable grief and showing that compassion and power can dance together in the light of God's love. Yet, while these miracles shone brightly, a shadow crept over the land of Israel. In the northern kingdom, many kings chose to wander away from the gentle guidance of God. One by one, these leaders built their own paths, turning their hearts toward idols and forgetting the commandments that had once bound them in a promise of love. Their choices led the nation into a tangled web of chaos and sorrow. After many years of warnings that went unheeded, a fearsome enemy, the Assyrians, invaded with an iron fist. The grand city of Samaria, once the beating heart of a nation, fell after a long and painful siege, scattering the people far and wide across strange lands. The nation's spirit, so full of promise once, was now shattered into pieces like broken glass. Yet, even in the midst of such deep sorrow, sparks of hope flickered in the southern kingdom of Judah. A new leader, King Hezekiah, rose up with a heart that remembered the old, beautiful ways. With determination as his shield, Hezekiah swept away the false idols, restored the temple, a sacred home for worship, and called upon the people to return to a life of true, heartfelt devotion. When the mighty Assyrian army set its sights on Jerusalem, Hezekiah did not tremble or flee. Instead, he poured out his hopes and fears in prayer, and the answer was as miraculous as a starburst in the night sky. An angel of God appeared and with a single sweep turned away the entire enemy army in one unforgettable night. Not long after, another devoted king, Josiah, discovered an ancient book during repairs at the temple. As the words of the old law filled his ears, Josiah's eyes were opened wide with both wonder and regret. Seeing how far his people had wandered from the loving ways of the past, he set about cleansing the land, banishing idols, and reviving the joy of true worship. Under his gentle guidance, a revival of hope began to stir once more, offering the people a chance to find their way back to the gentle light of God's care. After the great and wise king named Josiah passed away, the people of Judah started to wander off the path of kindness and truth. They began to follow strange idols and do things that made their hearts heavy. The wise prophets, with voices like gentle thunder, warned the people again and again, but many of the people chose not to listen. Then, one day, a mighty army from a far-off land called Babylon came marching in. The proud city of Jerusalem, with its beautiful temple that once shone like a treasure chest, was captured. The great temple was smashed into rubble, and the people were forced to leave their beloved home, carried away as captives. Imagine the deep sadness of leaving behind your family home, the place filled with memories and dreams, knowing that the land promised by God was lost, at least for now. Even though the people were far from home and felt lost, there was a special secret. God's promises were like seeds planted deep in the earth. Even in that painful exile, God had not forgotten his people. He began to sow tiny seeds of hope, a promise that one day they would return, renew their hearts, and feel his love in a brand new way. Now, all the amazing adventures of the people of Israel, from the wonderful beginnings in Genesis all the way through the brave stories of kings, had set the stage for a new way of remembering. The books called 1 and 2 Chronicles came along like a caring family, sitting together to recall the good times and the lessons learned. The books begin by listing families and their ancestors all the way back to the very first promise God made to the world. In these stories, the focus turned to King David and the royal line of Judah, the very line through which the most special promise, the coming of a Savior, was to be fulfilled. At the heart of this story was the temple, not just a building but a shining symbol of God's presence among his people. The temple was built with care by King Solomon. Every detail, from the way it was constructed to the special ways the people worshipped there, was designed to show how much God wanted to live with them. The priests followed rituals that were more than just fancy ceremonies. They reminded everyone that true worship comes from a heart that loves and trusts God. There were also kings who tried very hard to bring the people back to a life of goodness. King Hezekiah and King Josiah, for example, worked to tear down all the false idols and repair the temple so that people could once again live as God's very special children. Their efforts were like little sparks of light in a dark room, tiny glimmers that reminded everyone that no matter how far they had strayed, it was always possible to return to God with a warm, welcoming heart. Even though the Book of Kings ended in a dark moment with Jerusalem's fall and the sorrow of exile, the Book of Chronicles painted a picture of hope. 70 years after the exile, a kind and powerful king from far away, King Cyrus of Persia, issued a special decree. This decree allowed God's people to return to their homeland and rebuild the temple. It was as if God's promise had been written in the stars all along, shining brightly even when the land was desolate and the people felt lost. Every brick and every stone of the new temple was a sign that God's covenant, his promise to care for his people, could never be broken. And then came the book of Ezra, which is filled with a sense of excitement and anticipation. Imagine, after 70 long years in a strange land, the people of Israel finally being allowed to return to Jerusalem. Their hearts were filled with a bittersweet mix of joy and sorrow, joy for the chance to rebuild their home, and sadness because so much had changed since they had last walked those familiar streets. Under the careful guidance of a wise leader named Zerubbabel, they began to rebuild the temple piece by piece. Some of the people cheered loudly, their faces lighting up with hope as they saw the symbol of worship rising once again. Others wept softly, remembering the glory of the old temple and feeling the weight of loss. Yet every day, with steady hands and determined hearts, they labored to restore what was once so precious. The task was not without its challenges. As the new temple started to take shape, some neighboring folks did not like to see it being built. They used their words as sharp arrows and their power as a big, heavy stone to try and stop the work. For many years, the rebuilding stalled and the temple remained unfinished. But then, like gentle helpers sent on a mission, God sent prophets, Haggai and Zechariah, to encourage the people. Their messages were like warm breezes that stirred the people's hearts, reminding them of God's endless love and faithfulness. Moved by these words, the people found new strength and continued building, determined to finish the temple, a sign of their undying hope and trust in God. Sometime later, another brave leader came into the story. Ezra, a priest who loved God's word with all his heart. Ezra arrived with more people who had been living away from home, carrying with them hopes and dreams of reconnecting with their true identity. As Ezra began teaching the people the rules and the wisdom from God's law, he noticed that many had mixed their lives with the customs of the surrounding lands. This made Ezra's heart heavy, for he feared that the uniqueness of Israel's love for God might be lost. With deep care and firm resolve, Ezra led the people into a time of reflection and renewal, guiding them back to a life filled with obedience and true worship. His work was like a gentle reminder that rebuilding isn't only about stones and mortar, it's about rebuilding hearts and lives to align with God's love. In another part of this long unfolding story, a man named Nehemiah lived far away in the bustling city of Susa, in the land of Persia. Nehemiah worked in the royal palace as a cupbearer, a trusted servant of the king. Yet, even in this splendid court, his heart ached for his long-lost home, Jerusalem, whose mighty walls had crumbled to dust. Overwhelmed with sorrow, Nehemiah prayed earnestly to God, asking for the strength to rebuild the broken walls and restore the spirit of his people. Soon, his prayers were answered. King Artaxerxes of Persia granted Nehemiah permission to return to Jerusalem and lead the rebuilding effort. With a brave heart and a determined spirit, Nehemiah set off on an incredible journey back home. When he arrived, the sight of the ruined city stirred his soul, but it also filled him with resolve. With the help of his fellow citizens, Nehemiah began to rebuild the city walls, even when sneering neighbors like Sanballat and Tobiah tried to scare them with mocking words and threats. Nehemiah's faith never wavered. He encouraged everyone to work together, sometimes even holding a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other, as they labored day and night to repair the walls. In just 52 days, a feat as astonishing as a castle built from dreams, the walls stood strong once more, a sign of the people's renewed spirit and trust in God. With the walls rebuilt, Nehemiah and Ezra gathered all the people together for a special reading of God's law. As the ancient words filled the air, the people listened with wide eyes and trembling hearts. They were reminded of the promises and the guidelines that had once shaped their lives, and many found themselves moved to tears. It was a moment when every word was a lifeline, pulling them closer to their true home and identity. The revival of spirit that followed filled the streets with a renewed determination to live in obedience and love, embracing the hope that had been passed down through generations. In a faraway land, yet another extraordinary tale was unfolding, a tale of a brave young girl named Esther. Raised by her loving cousin Mordecai, Esther lived in a time when the Queen of Persia had been replaced, and the king was searching for someone special to wear the crown of queen. Esther, with her gentle smile and kind heart, was chosen to be the new queen, although she kept her true heritage a secret, as her dear cousin had advised. But not all was well in the royal palace. A wicked official named Haman harbored a deep and bitter anger toward the Jewish people. When Mordecai refused to bow down to Haman, the official's anger grew so fierce that he convinced King Xerxes to issue a terrible decree that all the Jewish people in the vast Persian Empire should be destroyed. The weight of this decree fell like a dark cloud over the hearts of the people, filling them with fear and uncertainty. In this dire moment, Mordecai urged Esther, "Perhaps you have been placed in this royal palace for just such a time as this." Though the thought of approaching the king without being called was scary, after all, it was against the rules and could cost her life, Esther knew she had to act. After days of quiet fasting and heartfelt prayer, she summoned every bit of courage she had. With trembling steps but a determined heart, Esther went before the king. At a grand banquet arranged by Esther, she revealed her true identity and exposed Haman's cruel plan. The revelation sent ripples through the palace, and the king, angered by the deception, ordered that Haman be punished on the very gallows he had prepared for someone else. Not only was the danger averted, but a new decree was made, allowing the Jewish people to protect themselves. In the end, the courage of a young queen and the quiet faith of a humble servant turned a moment of deep despair into one of triumphant rescue, a shining example of how God works quietly behind the scenes, guiding events to protect his people. The next book opens in a faraway land where there lived a kind and gentle man named Job. Imagine a person who was known throughout his village for being blameless and upright, a friend who always did what was right because he loved God with all his heart. Job's life sparkled with blessings. He had a big, happy family, lots of riches, and his health was as strong as a mighty oak. It was as if he lived in a world filled with sunshine and laughter every day. But one day, something mysterious began to unfold behind the scenes. Out of nowhere, a clever spirit named Satan appeared before God. With a sly whisper, Satan claimed, "Job's faith is only strong because he has all these wonderful blessings. If he loses them, will he still trust you?" God, who loves truth and trusts in the goodness of a heart, allowed Satan to test Job. And so, one by one, Job lost his wealth, his dear children, and even his health. Suddenly, Job found himself sitting in a pile of ashes, his body covered with painful sores, and his heart filled with sorrow as he tried to understand why such terrible things were happening. Imagine the feeling of watching a beautiful day suddenly turn stormy. Job felt that way, with tears for every loss he endured. His friends came to visit him, but instead of offering hugs and comforting words, they insisted he must have done something wrong to deserve such pain. They said that if someone suffers so much, it must be because they made a mistake. But Job, with a spirit as steady as the stars above, stood up for his innocence. He knew deep down that sometimes even the kindest souls face hard times that don't always have a simple reason. The conversations between Job and his friends stretched on, like a long, winding river full of questions and puzzled faces. They argued that suffering was always a result of bad choices, but Job, whose heart was filled with wonder and sorrow, began to see that life sometimes has twists and turns that are hard to explain. He questioned why, in a world made with so much care and love, pain could come knocking unexpectedly. One day, after pouring out all his feelings, Job heard a voice that wasn't like the words of his friends. God spoke, not by giving clear answers, but by taking Job on an incredible journey through the wonders of the world. God asked Job, "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation?" With each question, God showed Job the breathtaking beauty of the mountains, the deep mysteries of the oceans, and the endless dance of the stars in the night sky. Through these marvelous sights, Job began to understand that the world was full of secrets far too vast for any one person to know completely. Even though Job still didn't understand everything that happened to him, he learned to trust that there was a bigger plan at work, a plan woven from the threads of the universe itself. And even when his body ached and his heart was heavy, Job clung to his faith, knowing that sometimes believing in goodness means accepting that some mysteries will always remain. Now let's wander into a magical collection of songs and prayers that echo the feelings of every heart. This collection is called the Psalms, a spiritual journal filled with tunes of joy, sorrow, hope, and sometimes even a little confusion. Imagine the young shepherd named David before he became one of the greatest kings of Israel, sitting under a sky twinkling with stars, strumming a harp and singing to God. Sometimes his songs were happy, celebrating the beauty of the world. Other times they were soft and sad, expressing the weight of his mistakes or the depth of his longing for comfort. One famous song goes, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," which is like saying, God takes care of me and I have nothing to fear. And then there's a heartfelt song where David, feeling very sorry for his missteps, pours out his regret and asks for forgiveness. The Psalms are not always cheerful. Many of them are laments, open, honest cries from the heart when life feels really hard. They give permission to share our deepest hurts with God, just like when you whisper your worries to a trusted friend. And as these songs wind through feelings of pain and confusion, they often lift up a hopeful note, reminding everyone that even in the darkest moments, there is a soft light waiting to shine through. Following this book is the Book of Wisdom known as Proverbs, written by a wise king named Solomon, who loved to share little nuggets of advice that were as clear as a sunny day. Proverbs is like a treasure chest filled with tiny lessons about living wisely. One line tells us, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge," which means that respecting God is the very first step to understanding life. There's even a playful reminder, "Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider its ways, and be wise." Imagine watching a tiny ant, busy and diligent, always preparing for the future. It teaches us that even the smallest creature can show us the value of hard work. Proverbs whispers lessons about being honest, kind, and humble. It reminds us that our words are like magic spells, powerful enough to build friendships, or if used carelessly, to hurt others. And in every word, wisdom invites us to listen, to learn, and to live in a way that makes our hearts light and our steps sure. After the wise sayings, we come to Ecclesiastes, a book that feels a bit like a quiet reflection on life's puzzles. Here, a teacher who might be Solomon himself shares his deep thoughts about the meaning of life. He tells us that life can sometimes feel like trying to catch the wind, a playful yet elusive chase that leaves us wondering what really matters. He reminds us that there is a season for everything, a time to laugh, a time to cry, a time to grow, and a time to rest. Even with all his wealth and knowledge, the teacher finds that the truest happiness comes not from chasing after things that shimmer only for a moment, but from honoring the deeper, everlasting love of God. Ecclesiastes helps us see that every moment, whether filled with joy or sprinkled with sadness, is part of a grand, ever-changing story. It teaches that real meaning is found when we cherish what we have, and when we remember that every day has its own special value. Then, a burst of color and romance fills our story in the Song of Solomon. This book sings a joyful, poetic celebration of love, a love as sweet and vibrant as a garden in full bloom. Imagine a loving couple whose words to each other are like soft petals, expressing delight in every shared smile and tender touch. Their voices, filled with admiration and passion, remind us that love is a treasure, precious and beautiful. And as you listen, you might even see a glimpse of how God loves each of us, with a kindness that never fades and a joy that fills the heart with wonder. Our Bible tale continues with a vision that shines like a brilliant rainbow in the sky. A prophet named Isaiah has a powerful experience where he sees the Lord seated on a majestic throne, surrounded by a host of angelic voices singing, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty." In that dazzling moment, Isaiah feels small and shy, realizing just how grand and perfect God truly is. With a tender touch, an angel cleans Isaiah's lips with a glowing coal, washing away his worries and preparing him for a very important mission. Isaiah then sees his people who have wandered away, chasing after things that glitter but are empty inside. With a caring heart, he calls them to turn back, to listen to the gentle whisper of God's love, and to care for one another by seeking justice and helping those in need, defending the little ones and comforting those who feel lost. And then, with eyes wide open and a heart full of hope, Isaiah shares a wondrous promise. He speaks of a child who will be born, a tiny beacon of light called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. This child will bring comfort to the hurting and heal wounds with love. Even when suffering touches the world, Isaiah's words sparkle with the promise that love can mend even the deepest hurts, that hope can rise like a morning sun, and that a brighter future awaits. After Isaiah, there came a time when a kind-hearted young man named Jeremiah, known as the Weeping Prophet, walked among his people with a heavy heart. Jeremiah was called by God when he was very young. He whispered, "I am too little, too weak." But then a warm, reassuring voice said, "Do not be afraid, for I am with you." With these tender words, Jeremiah began his long journey as a messenger of truth, even though his words were sometimes hard for others to hear. Every day, Jeremiah spoke about the dangers of following false gods and doing things that hurt one another. He warned that if the people did not change their ways, their beloved city of Jerusalem would crumble, and they would be forced to leave their home far away. Even though his messages were wrapped in love, many people laughed at him and treated him unkindly. Yet Jeremiah stayed brave, always telling the truth, no matter how much it hurt him inside. In a moment that shone like a spark in the dark, Jeremiah shared a promise of a brand new kind of friendship between God and his people. He said, "One day I will write my laws on your hearts. I will be your God, and you will be my people." This promise was like a magical key, hinting at a future when everyone could know God in a special, personal way, a promise that would someday be fulfilled in a very special friend named Jesus. As the years passed, a great and sorrowful change came. The mighty kingdom of Babylon invaded, and Jeremiah's warnings began to come true. He watched with a tearful gaze as Jerusalem was laid to waste, the beautiful temple burned, and the people were forced to leave their homes. In a book called Lamentations, the people's grief was poured out like a river of sorrow. Mothers wept for their lost children, priests mourned the broken sanctuary, and even the city seemed to cry. Yet amidst all the tears, Jeremiah reminded everyone with gentle strength, "Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning." In this message, even in the midst of deep sadness, a tiny light of hope began to glow. Far away in a land called Babylon, a faithful priest named Ezekiel found himself far from home, sitting quietly by a shimmering river. One day, as the wind roared like 1,000 voices and flashes of brilliant light danced all around him, Ezekiel saw something incredible, a vision that made his eyes widen in wonder. He saw swirling wheels covered in many sparkling eyes and mysterious creatures moving in perfect harmony. It was as if the very air was alive with magic, showing him that even in a faraway land, God's power and love were everywhere. In that marvelous vision, Ezekiel learned that God had not forgotten his people. Instead, God sent him to be a watchman for Israel, a guardian who would speak God's words of both warning and hope. Ezekiel's actions were just as dramatic as his visions. He lay on his side for a long time to show how Jerusalem would be surrounded by danger. He even cut and divided his hair to symbolize how the people of his beloved city would be scattered. These actions might have seemed strange, but they were like vivid pictures meant to help everyone understand that every choice has a real consequence. Then came one of the most astonishing scenes. Ezekiel was led to a valley filled with dry, brittle bones scattered across the dusty ground. At first, the sight was very sad, a valley that looked like it had lost all hope. But God whispered to Ezekiel, "Speak to these bones, tell them to live." And as Ezekiel obeyed, something magical happened. The bones began to rattle, slowly coming together as if they were pieces of a great puzzle. Then, with a gentle breath, God filled them with life, and they rose up as a vast, mighty army. This amazing vision reminded everyone that no matter how lost or lifeless things may seem, God has the power to bring new life and hope into our hearts. In another brilliant vision, Ezekiel saw a brand new temple, a special, sparkling house where God's presence would dwell with his people once again. It was more than just a building. It was a promise that God's love would always be near, guiding and comforting his children wherever they might be. Meanwhile, in the bustling city of Babylon, a young man named Daniel and his loyal friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, continued to shine brightly as beacons of faith. Taken far from their home, they lived in a land filled with strange customs and gods made of gold. Even though they were surrounded by these wonders, they chose to remain true to the one God they loved. When it came time to eat the food of the land, they asked for a simple meal of vegetables and water, trusting that what was pure and simple was best for their hearts. One day, the mighty King Nebuchadnezzar made a giant golden statue, commanding everyone to bow down in admiration. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood tall and refused to worship anything other than their true God. So the king, filled with anger, tossed them into a fiery furnace so hot it could melt even the strongest metal. Yet as the flames roared and danced around them, a marvelous sight occurred. An extra, radiant figure appeared, glowing like a gentle guardian, and the three friends walked safely through the fire without a single burn. Their courage and faith sparkled like stars, showing everyone that even in the hottest trials, God's protective love surrounds those who remain true. Daniel's own adventures were filled with moments that took everyone's breath away. During a grand feast thrown by King Belshazzar, mysterious words appeared on the wall. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin, a secret message that warned the king of his coming end. That very night, the mighty city of Babylon fell to a new power, just as Daniel had foretold. Later, when King Darius became ruler, Daniel was thrown into a den filled with fierce lions because he continued his daily prayers to God. In that dark, dangerous place, Daniel's faith shone brightly as God gently closed the mouths of the roaring lions, keeping him safe through the night. Daniel's journey didn't stop there. In his dreams and visions, he saw kingdoms rise and fall, and even a ruler like a son of man who would bring about a wonderful promise. A promise that God's kingdom would be forever, shining brightly no matter how many earthly kingdoms came and went. These visions filled the hearts of those who listened with hope and a belief that, even in a world that sometimes feels chaotic, a gentle, everlasting kingdom is always on the horizon. Imagine, little friends, that God's grand story isn't just one big adventure. It's a patchwork of many smaller tales, each bursting with love, lessons, and surprises. Let's meet a few very special characters whose lives remind us that even when we stray, there is always a way back to a warm, welcoming hug. Once, long ago, there was a prophet named Hosea. God asked Hosea to do something very unusual and brave. He told him to marry a lady named Gomer. Now, Gomer wasn't always the most faithful friend. She was a harlot, but every time she strayed, Hosea's heart was full of love and forgiveness. He would gently bring her back, wrapping her in his care, even when she made mistakes. Hosea's life was like a picture that showed us how much God loves us. Just as Hosea's love for Gomer never wavered, God's love for us is endless, even when we stumble. Through Hosea's tender actions and even his heartaches, we learn that God's love isn't about being perfect. It's about forgiving and welcoming us back with open arms every single time. God's gentle whisper is heard in Hosea's words, "How can I ever give you up, Ephraim?" This shows us that no matter how far we wander, God's loving heart is always calling us home. Now imagine a time when the land is suddenly covered by a swarm of tiny, hungry locusts. This was the time of a prophet named Joel. The locusts came in such great numbers that they made the fields look empty and bare, like a giant invisible hand had wiped away all the green. But even in the midst of this startling disaster, Joel's message was filled with hope. He invited everyone to turn back to God, saying, "Who knows, perhaps he will turn and leave a blessing." Joel taught us that even when things seem gloomy, God's Spirit is ready to pour out like a magical rain that makes everything grow again. He promised, "I will pour out my Spirit on all people." Imagine a gentle breeze that fills you with a sparkling energy, making you feel brave and loved. That's the gift of God's Spirit. Joel's words remind us that every heart can be renewed and every day can be filled with new joy. In the next book, we see a humble shepherd from a little town named Tekoa. His name is Amos. He wasn't a famous teacher or a grand king, just a gentle soul who watched over his fig trees and playful sheep. One bright day, while enjoying his simple life, Amos heard God's call. Suddenly, he was given a very important message for his people. In the bustling marketplace, amidst the sound of chatter and the clatter of busy feet, Amos's voice rang out loud and clear, "Let justice roll on like a mighty river, and let righteousness flow like a never-ending stream." His words were as refreshing as cool water on a hot day, and as stirring as a merry song. Amos reminded everyone that having treasures isn't enough if our hearts aren't full of kindness. God sees the goodness inside us far deeper than any shiny coin or beautiful trinket. Amos's call was a gentle push to wake up from a deep, comfortable nap and start caring for one another. His message asked each person, "Are you treating your friends and neighbors with fairness and love?" He wanted everyone to share, care, and help make the world a friendlier place. Then, we meet a tiny but powerful voice in the book of Obadiah. This story tells about a land called Edom, where people forgot to help their brothers and sisters when they were in trouble. Instead, they sat by and even took things that weren't theirs. Obadiah, with a firm tone, reminded them and us that when we turn away from our friends, the same loneliness might find us one day. He softly said, "No matter how high you think you stand, always stay humble and kind. Even though his words might seem like a little tap on the shoulder to wake us up, they remind us that God's kingdom is for everyone, especially those who remember to care for each other and keep their hearts gentle. And now let's dive into a tale that sounds almost like a daring adventure on the high seas. In this part of our tale, we meet Jonah, a man with a big heart but a stubborn streak, whose story is as full of twists and turns as a roller coaster ride. God asked Jonah to visit Nineveh, a gigantic city known for its rough ways and mean tricks, and to tell its people to change their ways. But Jonah wasn't too keen on sharing God's loving message with those he considered his foes. Instead, he decided to run away, hopping on a ship that sailed far away from Nineveh, hoping to escape God's plan. But guess what? You can't hide from God. Soon, a wild and stormy tempest roared over the ship. The winds howled, the waves crashed, and everyone on board was scared silly. Jonah, realizing that no storm could hide him from God's care, told the brave sailors, "Throw me overboard, and you might just save yourselves." And so, with a mix of bravery and a pinch of regret, Jonah was tossed into the swirling sea. As the choppy waters embraced him, a giant fish, like a friendly sea monster from a fairy tale, swallowed Jonah whole. For 3 whole days and nights, Jonah found himself inside the fish's cozy belly. In that dark, watery room, he had plenty of time to think. With his heart softening and his mind filled with wonder, Jonah whispered prayers to God, realizing that his love was too vast to run from. Then, in a miraculous twist, the fish spat Jonah out onto warm, dry land, giving him a second chance to follow God's call. Arriving in Nineveh, Jonah shared a simple yet powerful message: 40 more days, and Nineveh will be overthrown. To his astonishment, the people of Nineveh, from the mightiest king to the humblest villager, believed him. They wrapped themselves in rough, homespun cloth called sackcloth, skipped their daily feasts, and prayed with all their hearts, begging God for forgiveness. And wouldn't you know it, God saw their sincere change of heart and spared the great city. But Jonah's feelings were not all sunshine and rainbows. Instead of feeling joy for the people's new hope, Jonah's heart grew stormy. He sat outside the city, grumbling and frowning because he wished for Nineveh to be punished instead. To teach him a lesson about love and mercy, God sent a little plant that grew overnight, shading Jonah from the hot sun. When the next day came and the plant withered away, Jonah's anger flared once more. And then God softly asked him, "Should I not care about the great city of Nineveh, where more than 120,000 people live?" With that question, God reminded Jonah, and all of us, that his compassion reaches even those we might find hardest to forgive. Next, we travel to a time when a brave prophet named Micah stepped up to speak to the leaders and people of Israel and Judah. Micah wasn't one to whisper soft secrets. He spoke with a voice that could shake mountains. With all his heart, he asked, "What does the Lord require of you?" His question wasn't just for grown-ups, it was for everyone. "Act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God," he said, inviting everyone to live in a way that makes the world kinder and fairer. Imagine a crowded marketplace where people bustle about, each too busy to notice the sorrow around them. Micah's words cut through that clamor like a bright beam of light, showing everyone the way to be good and gentle. He painted a picture of a future where swords would turn into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks, a time when even the harshest tools of war would transform into instruments for planting seeds of peace. In his powerful vision, justice and mercy danced hand in hand, creating a world that sparkled with hope. As we continue our adventure, we return to the city of Nineveh, but this time with a different messenger. The prophet Nahum appeared with a voice as firm as a drumbeat, warning that the mighty city, which once turned its heart away from goodness, would soon face a just reckoning. Nahum's message was for the people who had suffered under the cruel ways of Assyria, a land that had brought fear and heartache to many. His words promised that no empire, no matter how powerful it seemed, could escape the loving justice of God. "The Lord is slow to anger but mighty in power," Nahum declared, reminding everyone that even when mercy seems endless, there is a time when wrongs must be made right. Then comes the thoughtful prophet Habakkuk, whose story is like a quiet conversation under a starry sky. Habakkuk saw all the injustice and hurt in his world and couldn't help but ask, "How long, Lord, must I cry for help while things stay so wrong?" His questions were like little sparks of curiosity, questions that sometimes make us wonder why bad things happen even when we try our best to be good. In his honest heart, Habakkuk wondered why the wicked seemed to get away with their wrongs. But then, in a gentle and surprising reply, God reminded him, "The righteous will live by their faith." Even though the answer wasn't what Habakkuk had expected, it helped him understand that sometimes trusting God means believing in His plan even when we can't see all the pieces. Not long after, another voice rose, one filled with both warning and hope. The prophet Zephaniah spoke of a special day of the Lord, a day when everything would be set right. He warned that on that day, troubles would come like a fierce storm, wrath, distress, and anguish. But even then, there was a call to return to goodness. Zephaniah urged everyone to seek the Lord with all their heart, to be gentle, and to live simply. His words were like an open invitation to start over, to turn back to the love that makes life beautiful. And even as his message hinted at tough times ahead, Zephaniah's words sparkled with the promise that God would gather His people together in a warm embrace, ready to celebrate a future filled with peace and unity. When the people returned from a long, sorrowful journey of exile, they found their homeland a bit worn and weary. They had rebuilt many things, but something was missing, a spark of joy in their hearts. Enter Haggai, a spirited prophet who reminded them that their happiness was tied to their love for God. With a caring voice, Haggai said, "Look at what you're doing. You've worked so hard, but your hearts aren't in it." He compared their empty purses to holes that wouldn't keep anything inside, urging them to focus on rebuilding the temple, the special house where they could feel God's presence. As the people picked up their tools once more and began to rebuild with all their might, God whispered, "I am with you," filling their hearts with warmth and courage. The adventure doesn't stop with Haggai. The prophet Zechariah appeared with visions as magical as a dream. He saw wondrous images, 4 horsemen patrolling the land, a high priest being washed and made pure, and a gleaming golden lampstand that shone like hope itself. One vision in particular caught everyone's eye, the promise of a branch, a royal helper who would be both king and priest, bringing peace, kindness, and a world where everyone lived in harmony. This beautiful promise filled the hearts of the people with hope as they eagerly waited for the day when everyone, no matter where they came from, could join together in a grand celebration of love and unity. In the last book of our journey so far before the New Covenant, we meet Malachi, a prophet whose words were like a wake-up call to a sleepy world. Malachi saw that the people's worship had become a routine, something done without true love or excitement. He asked, "Are these offerings really the best you have for me?" His words made the people think hard about their hearts and their actions. He spoke to both the regular folks and the temple priests, reminding everyone that true worship comes from a joyful, sincere heart. And then, with a promise that twinkled like a hidden star, Malachi shared that a special messenger would soon come to prepare the way for the Lord, a messenger whose task was to make sure every heart was ready to receive the gift of God's love. Imagine a quiet moment after a very long story, a pause where everyone listens with hearts full of hope. In our old story, the people waited patiently, and even though a long, silent time followed, the last whisper from the prophet Malachi sparkled like a hidden gem. His words, filled with promise and excitement, pointed toward a day when every promise would come true with the arrival of someone very special, Jesus, the Savior who would forever bring people closer to God. And then, like turning the page to a brand new chapter, the story begins again with the New Testament. This part of the grand adventure tells us about the life of Jesus and all the amazing things that happened because of him. The New Testament is like a colorful treasure box filled with different kinds of stories. There are the Gospels, which are joyful accounts of Jesus' life as seen through the eyes of his friends. Stories that tell us about the early days of the church and how people started sharing his message. Letters from a kind teacher named Paul, full of lessons on how to live with love. Other letters written by different friends of Jesus. And a magical book called Revelation, filled with mysterious visions given to a man named John. Let's open this treasure box together and explore each part of this wondrous new story. Our journey begins with the story of Matthew, who starts by sharing something very special, a family tree that reaches all the way back to Abraham and King David. Imagine hearing the names of mighty heroes from long, long ago and realizing that every one of those wonderful promises was like a tiny star, lighting the way for Jesus' arrival. This isn't just a list of names, it's a reminder that God's love and faithfulness have been carried down through the ages, all coming together in this very moment. When Jesus was born, he wasn't wrapped in silks or born in a grand palace. No, his first breath was taken in a humble stable in Bethlehem, a simple place with straw on the floor and animals softly snoring in the background. Isn't it amazing to think that the King of all creation chose such a modest beginning? Even when wise men from faraway lands brought dazzling gifts, Matthew shows us that Jesus' kingdom isn't about mighty armies or glittering crowns. It's about kindness, helping one another, and sharing love with everyone. Soon, Matthew invites us to imagine sitting in a crowd on a gentle hillside as Jesus begins one of his most famous talks, the Sermon on the Mount. Picture him with a warm smile saying, "Blessed are those who are humble, blessed are those who show mercy." He doesn't promise piles of treasure or grand power. Instead, he offers us a way of living that fills our hearts with joy and peace, teaching us that true strength comes from forgiving and loving even when it's hard. And then, in another part of his story, Matthew shows us how Jesus performed wonderful miracles. Imagine Jesus reaching out with gentle hands to touch someone who was very sick or unwanted, like a lonely person who no one else dared to go near. With just a touch, he healed them, making them whole again and showing everyone that no one is ever too broken to be loved by God. The tale in Matthew grows even more dramatic as it takes us to the moment when Jesus faced a terrible trial. Though he was betrayed by those he trusted, Jesus chose to go through the pain of the cross with courage and love, all for us. And then, on a bright and miraculous morning, something even more astonishing happened. Jesus rose from the dead. Imagine the shock and joy on the faces of his friends when they saw him alive again, a shining symbol that even when darkness seems to cover everything, God's love brings light back into our lives. Matthew leaves us with a powerful invitation, urging all of us to carry this hope like a precious torch into the world. Next, we meet Mark's story, or otherwise called the Gospel according to St. Mark. Mark doesn't spend time on long family histories. Instead, he zooms right into the heart of Jesus' adventure. In Mark's account, Jesus is always on the move, teaching, healing, and chasing away demons with his powerful words. His energy is contagious, like the burst of a bright firework that lights up the sky and leaves everyone gasping in wonder. Mark shows us a Jesus who isn't content to sit and rest. When he speaks, he does so with an urgency that makes us want to jump up and join him in his work. Have you ever felt that special spark inside you, an urge to help someone, to be brave, or to share a smile? Jesus invites each of us to follow that spark and be a light in the lives of others. Even when the winds of a fierce storm roared and the sea roiled like a wild beast, Jesus simply spoke, and everything became calm. Imagine standing by the water, feeling the roar of the waves, and then, with a few kind words, watching as the storm settles into a peaceful hush. Mark reminds us that true power is not about force, but about caring deeply for every living thing and using that care to bring comfort and hope. In another twist, Mark tells us about the time when Jesus chose a path that was filled with sacrifice. His friends, expecting a dazzling hero, were surprised when Jesus said, "I have come to serve, not to be served." Picture their wide eyes and furrowed brows as they realize that greatness doesn't come from being at the top, but from humbly caring for others. And when Jesus faced the sorrow of the cross, even as he suffered, a kind Roman soldier whispered in wonder, "Surely this man is the Son of God." And then, like a brilliant sunrise, the empty tomb told a story of new beginnings. The book of Luke is like a warm, welcoming hug. It reaches out to everyone, even those who feel left out or forgotten. Imagine walking along a dusty village road and seeing Jesus pause to talk to someone who is usually overlooked, a tax collector, a Samaritan, or a person who feels too small to matter. Luke paints a picture of Jesus walking side by side with those who need a friend, reminding us that his love knows no boundaries. Have you ever felt that you weren't good enough? In Luke's world, every single one of us is cherished, just as we are. Jesus' kindness shines brightly in Luke's story. He heals the sick, gives sight to the blind, and even calls back the dead, one by one. Each miracle is like a personal visit from a caring friend who comes to remind you that you are never alone. And then, Luke tells us some wonderful parables, the stories of the Good Samaritan and the prodigal son, where hearts are mended with forgiveness and love. Imagine hearing a story where a kind stranger stops to help a hurt traveler, or where a loving father runs to embrace his lost child. These stories invite us to open our hearts wide and share love without expecting anything in return. As Jesus walks toward the city of Jerusalem, Luke shows us the growing determination in his eyes, a quiet strength and purpose that encourages everyone to believe in a better tomorrow. And even on the road when life feels uncertain, his gentle presence is there, inviting us to notice the quiet miracles all around us. John's tale begins with a whisper of mystery, a powerful secret that has been with God since the very start. In the beginning was the Word, John tells us, and then unfolds a story where Jesus is seen as the shining light in the darkness. Imagine a night so dark that you feel lost, and then suddenly a glowing light appears, guiding your steps. That light is Jesus, the true light of the world, who shows us the way, fills us with hope, and chases away every shadow of doubt. John shares some very special signs that reveal Jesus' divine nature. Picture the moment when sorrow turns into celebration, as Jesus calls a friend back to life with just a few heartfelt words. Every miracle in John's story is like a secret smile from God, a promise that his love is real and near. And throughout his tale, Jesus speaks about who he is in magical statements like, "I am the bread of life," and "I am the good shepherd." These words are not just clever phrases, they are a promise that Jesus is the one who nourishes our souls and guides us with a gentle hand. Even as he shared a quiet meal with his friends, Jesus washed their feet, showing that true greatness comes from serving others with love. And even in the midst of great sorrow on the cross, his words of forgiveness and care reached out like a comforting blanket. Then, when he rose again, his first words were a gentle blessing of peace, inviting everyone to feel the calm and sure embrace of God's everlasting love. After these wonderful stories of Jesus' life, the adventure continues in the book of Acts. Imagine a group of friends, once scared and unsure, now filled with a bright, powerful energy, as if a great wind had swept through their hearts and given them the courage to speak up and share all the good news. On the day of Pentecost, the Holy Spirit rushed in like a mighty wind, filling the hearts of Jesus' friends with boldness and joy. They began to share his message everywhere, like sparks flying in the night, lighting up dark corners with hope. The early church, as described in Acts, was a lively family that cared for one another deeply. They met every day to pray, laugh, and support each other, showing the world that when hearts are united, nothing can break the spirit of love. Even when challenges came, like being chased away or facing storms at sea, their faith shone brightly, and they continued to spread the good news with joyful determination. One of the most astonishing moments in Acts is when a man named Saul, who had once been unkind to those who followed Jesus, encountered the risen Savior. In an instant, his heart transformed, and he became one of the most passionate messengers of this great, life-changing love. As the story in Acts unfolds, the message of hope and renewal spreads far and wide, reaching all kinds of people from every corner of the earth. Now let's open a new chapter in our adventure, a time when a brave messenger named Paul sat down to write letters filled with instructions, hope, and the warm glow of God's love. Paul wasn't writing to a few friends in a tiny town. He was sharing his heart with many people, even those he had never met, as if sitting around a cozy campfire telling a tale that could change lives. In this part, we'll follow the enchanting sequences of 3 books from his letters: Romans, 1 Corinthians, and 2 Corinthians. Each chapter of these books sparkles with lessons that help us see how God's love and grace work in our lives. In his letter to the Christians in Rome, Paul explains that everyone sometimes chooses to go their own way, like wandering off on a path that isn't always filled with sunshine. He tells us that even though we sometimes stumble and struggle with things called sin, there is a wonderful hope in Jesus. Paul exclaims, "I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation." Can you picture that? A message so powerful, it lifts you up and frees you from anything that holds you back. Paul tells us about the wonderful gift of grace, a special kind of love that we receive not because we have done everything perfectly, but simply because Jesus loves us. He reminds us that everyone has made mistakes, just as he says, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Yet we are made right with God not by our own efforts, but because of his grace. Imagine the relief of knowing that you don't have to be perfect to be loved. It's like receiving the most precious present that you never have to earn. Paul even shares the story of Abraham to show that long, long ago, God chose to love people who trusted him wholeheartedly. If you've ever felt like you weren't good enough, remember that God's love doesn't depend on how perfect you are. It depends only on his amazing kindness and endless grace. Even Paul, who helped spread these joyful news, admitted that sometimes he did things he wished he hadn't. Yet, he found comfort in knowing that no matter what, nothing can ever separate us from the love of God. Paul's words in Romans invite us to believe in this love every day and to trust that it can change our lives in the most delightful ways. Now, let's imagine a bustling, lively city called Corinth, a place where people from all different walks of life came together, but sometimes they forgot that they were part of one big family. In his letter to the Corinthians, Paul writes like a caring pastor who wants to mend broken ties and build a bridge of unity. He asks a very important question: is Christ divided? Which is like asking, are we all really separate, or do we all belong together under one big loving umbrella? Paul reminds everyone that true love is not about showing off our gifts or comparing ourselves to one another. He takes us to a very special chapter, often called the love chapter. Here, he paints a picture of love that is patient like a quiet morning, kind like a gentle breeze, humble like a small flower, and forgiving like a soft rain washing away mistakes. He tells us, if I speak in the languages of men and even angels but don't have love, I am nothing more than a noisy gong. Imagine a world where every word and every action is wrapped in love, a love that makes everything sparkle brighter and every heart beat a little happier. Paul also explains that every member of the church, just like every part of a body, is unique and important. Think of a body where each part, a hand, an eye, or a foot, has a special job. The same way, each person has a special gift to share with the whole family of believers. Whether you're good at singing, telling stories, or lending a helping hand, your talent is a treasure meant to bring joy and strength to everyone. And there is even more to this chapter, a promise of hope that lights up the future. Paul reminds the Corinthians that just as Jesus rose again, so too will all who trust in him. This isn't just a promise for later, it's a beacon of hope that fills our hearts today, encouraging us to live with courage and joy because our future is secure in God's everlasting love. In his second letter to the Corinthians, Paul writes from a place of deep honesty and tenderness. Imagine him sitting with you on a soft, grassy hill, speaking gently about times when even heroes have felt weak and uncertain. He tells the people that even though we sometimes feel small and fragile, God's strength shines the brightest when we are at our weakest. He says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." This is like saying, when you feel like you can't do it on your own, remember that God is right there with you, making you stronger than you ever imagined. Paul's words remind us that life isn't always easy. Sometimes we might face hardships, moments of confusion, or times when we feel a little lost. But just like a warm blanket on a chilly day, God's comfort is always there to wrap around us. He tells us that God is the God of all comfort, who comes close to us in our troubles so that we can, in turn, share that comfort with others. Imagine the joy of knowing that when you're hurting, you can lean on God's loving arms and then help someone else feel that same warmth when they need it. Another sparkling idea in this chapter is about giving from the heart. Paul reminds the Corinthians that generosity isn't measured by how much we give, but by the love in our hearts. He cheerfully proclaims, "God loves a cheerful giver." This means that every little gift, every kind word, and every act of care is like a tiny star lighting up the world with hope and joy. Picture a night sky filled with countless twinkling stars, all because people chose to share their love generously. In these letters, Paul shows us that life is a mix of challenges and miracles, that our struggles can become the very stage for God's marvelous power, and that in our shared journey, every heart matters. His words encourage us to lean into God's grace, embrace our unique gifts, and spread love like magic dust all around us. Imagine a time when some people believed that following a long list of rules, like a secret code of customs, could make them right with God. Paul saw that this idea was like trying to win a prize by following a complicated set of instructions. He picked up his quill and wrote a letter called Galatians to remind everyone of a very important secret. God's love is a gift that we receive with open hearts, not something we earn by ticking off boxes. Paul's words burst with passion, as if he were saying, "Hurry, little ones, come and see. Christ has set us free to dance in the sunshine of his grace." He taught that our journey isn't about being perfect or following a long list of rules, but about accepting the free, wonderful gift of God's love. Just like receiving a brightly wrapped present, grace is given to us without having to work for it. It's already ours in Jesus. He compared the law to a kind tutor who guides us until we're ready for the big adventure with Jesus. Once we learn to trust him, we no longer need to be watched over by strict rules. Instead, we get to live a life filled with love and thankfulness, following the gentle whisper of the Spirit in our hearts. Have you ever felt weighed down by having to be perfect? Paul's letter in Galatians reminds us that we are free to be joyful just as we are. Now, let's turn the page to another letter called Ephesians. In this chapter, Paul invites us to imagine ourselves as part of a huge, sparkling family, chosen and loved by God from the very beginning. Picture being wrapped in a big, warm hug that tells you, you belong, you are precious, and you're part of something wonderful. Paul tells us that in Christ, all the walls that once divided people, like lines drawn on a map between different lands, melt away. He shares a message so powerful that it brings together people from faraway places, whether they were once strangers or friends. In this new family, there's no us and them. There is only one big, joyful community. Imagine a playground where every child, no matter where they come from, plays together, shares laughter, and builds castles of dreams. In Ephesians, Paul calls on us to see ourselves as part of this great family. He asks us to remember that we are adopted into God's loving care, and to let that remind us that every act of kindness builds the bridges of unity. His words are like a gentle song, inviting us to be peacemakers and helpers, treating everyone with respect and love. Next, we open a letter that sparkles with happiness. Philippians, known as the Joy Letter. Paul wrote this letter while he was in a place that wasn't so cheerful, a prison, where the walls were cold and the days seemed long. Yet his heart danced with a joy that could light up even the darkest corners. Paul wanted everyone to know that true happiness doesn't depend on where you are or what's happening around you. It comes from a loving friendship with Jesus, a joy that makes you feel as if you're wrapped in a soft, glowing blanket of hope and courage. In Philippians, Paul tells us to remember that even when life feels tough, we can still rejoice and be thankful. His words encourage us to see every challenge as a chance to grow stronger, just like a little seed that pushes through the soil to bloom into a beautiful flower. The joy in Philippians is a joyful reminder that with Jesus by our side, every day can be filled with hope, laughter, and the warmth of true friendship. Some people thought that following extra spiritual tricks or secret knowledge could bring them closer to God. But Paul's words in Colossians burst like a bright star, declaring, "No extra magic is needed, Jesus is enough. He is the image of God, the one who holds the universe together." His message is clear. When we center our lives around Jesus, we find that our hearts become as fresh and new as a crisp morning breeze. Paul explains that through Jesus, we are freed from the heavy burden of sin, like taking off old, worn-out clothes and slipping into a brand new, shining outfit. This transformation isn't about following endless rules. It's about living as joyful children of God. Every smile, every kind deed, every act of love reflects the amazing light of Jesus in our lives. Our journey continues with a letter to the bright and brave church of Thessalonica. In 1 Thessalonians, Paul writes with the gentle care of a loving parent, encouraging his young friends to stay strong and full of hope, even when the road seems bumpy. The Thessalonians were a young and lively community, much like a spirited group of friends who sometimes face hard times. Paul reminds them that life is full of wonderful surprises and important lessons. He tells them to live in a way that shows the warmth of God's love, choosing goodness in every action and cherishing every kind word shared. Imagine your heart as a glowing lantern that lights up the dark corners, inspiring everyone around you to feel hopeful and loved. Paul also talks about something very special, the promise that Jesus will return one day. He explains that even though we might feel sad or confused when someone we love is not around, there is a beautiful reunion waiting for us in the future. This promise fills us with a sense of wonder, like knowing that a long-awaited treasure will one day be discovered. Paul's words in 1 Thessalonians are a gentle reminder to keep our hearts open, supporting one another and walking together in faith and love. We delve into 2 Thessalonians, where Paul writes once again with heartfelt encouragement. In this letter, he reminds his dear friends that even when life seems to be full of uncertainties and waiting, every moment counts. Paul speaks as if he were urging us to run a fun race, not too fast, not too slow, but just the right pace, knowing that every step brings us closer to the joyful finish line. He gently warns that some may start to worry too much about what might happen, almost as if they've fallen asleep when it's time to wake up and live fully. Instead, Paul invites us to be alert, to cherish each day as a precious gift, and to live out our lives with a sense of purpose that lights up the world around us. He tells us that even in the midst of our everyday adventures, our faith should shine like a beacon, inspiring those around us to join in the journey of hope and love. Paul's letters to Thessalonians teach us that faith is not just something we hold deep inside. It's a living, breathing force that shows in every smile, every kind gesture, and every brave step forward. His words encourage us to keep working hard, to stay active in our faith, and to support one another as part of one big, joyful family. Paul's words to Timothy shimmer with the warmth of a caring mentor and the practicality of a wise guide. Picture Timothy as a young, determined leader of the church in Ephesus, a city bustling with vibrant life, yet shadowed by the challenges of false teachings and internal struggles. In these letters, Paul speaks as a devoted father would to his beloved child, urging him to lead with honesty, compassion, and a steadfast focus on Jesus. Paul's counsel is gentle yet firm, a heartfelt reminder for Timothy to keep his heart anchored in truth. He paints a picture of a faithful leader who must steer clear of endless arguments and distractions. Instead, Paul emphasizes the importance of having Jesus at the center of every decision, every sermon, and every act of kindness. Imagine Timothy, pen in hand, absorbing these lessons like a gardener tending to precious seedlings, each word a drop of nourishment for a young spirit, learning to bloom under the sun of divine love. The letters are deeply personal. In one stirring message written from the cold, shadowed confines of a Roman prison cell, Paul pours out his heart. He writes as if reaching across the distance to whisper, "Carry this torch forward." The words echo with the weight of a life fully lived in faith, urging Timothy to hold fast to his calling, even when the path grows rugged and uncertain. The imagery is vivid, a lone figure in a dim cell, yet his words burst forth with hope and encouragement. Paul also invites us to reflect on our own mentors, who in our lives offers that steady hand and encouraging word, guiding us through the maze of challenges. The letters call on us to cherish those bonds of mentorship that fortify our faith and inspire us to become beacons of truth in our own communities. In these writings, Paul is also careful to warn Timothy of the subtle snares of misleading ideas. He knows that in a world full of competing voices, the call to follow the gospel might sometimes be drowned out by noise. Paul's advice is clear: remain grounded in the goodness of God's word, and let it light the way through the maze of distraction. The picture he paints is one of youthful determination, where every challenge is met with a resolve to keep Jesus at the very center of life. Paul's letter to Titus unfolds like a cherished handbook for living a life of integrity amid a world that often seems adrift in self-interest and rebellion. Titus finds himself on the sun-dappled shores of Crete, a land known for its independent spirit and sometimes unruly customs. Paul writes to him with the care of a seasoned captain guiding his ship through stormy seas, urging Titus to be a steady beacon of godly wisdom and moral courage. In his letter, Paul does not mince words. He lays out the blueprint for what it means to live a life that stands apart. True Christian living, Paul insists, is not just about having the right beliefs. It's about translating those beliefs into daily actions. Imagine Titus, perhaps weary from the weight of cultural pressures, reading these words as if they were a refreshing breeze on a sweltering day. Paul's instructions are precise and vivid. Leaders should be marked by integrity, humility, and self-control. They are not to seek admiration or flashy accolades, but to hold fast to a message that is both trustworthy and transformative. Paul's tone is both encouraging and exacting. He challenges Titus, and through him, every leader, to be above reproach, a person whose life mirrors the gentle strength and quiet dignity of Christ. picture a community where every person acts as a living testament to truth and love, where kindness and patience guide every interaction. Paul's letter to Titus is not merely a set of rules, it is a stirring call to a lifestyle where every action is a prayer, every decision a step in a larger journey of faith. In urging Titus to embrace these values, Paul paints a picture of Christian living that is both beautiful and practical. It is a life where self-control and upright conduct are not burdens, but the very keys to unlocking the door to a thriving community. A community where even those who do not yet know the gospel are drawn to the radiant example of godly living. In the brief yet profoundly moving letter to Philemon, Paul turns the spotlight on the transformative power of forgiveness and the redemptive nature of love. Philemon, a dear friend and fellow believer, is addressed not as an authority figure, but as a cherished brother. The context is delicate. Onesimus, a servant who had once fled and caused harm, has now encountered the light of the gospel. Paul writes to Philemon with gentle urgency, inviting him to see Onesimus through a new lens, a lens polished by grace and renewed purpose. Imagine Philemon reading these heartfelt lines, feeling the stir of a compassionate heart that is being gently nudged toward reconciliation. Paul's words do not issue commands. Instead, they are an appeal born out of shared faith and deep friendship. He lovingly calls Onesimus a beloved brother, transforming a difficult situation into an opportunity for healing. The tone is tender, imbued with the spirit of forgiveness that transforms relationships. The message in this letter is simple yet profound. Forgiveness is not just about letting go of the past. It is about embracing a future where every person is seen as part of one big family, united by the love of Christ. Paul's gentle request is an invitation for Philemon to extend grace, to mend the bonds of trust and kinship that define true community. The letter reminds us that in every act of forgiveness, there is a spark of the divine, a chance to witness the miraculous power of love in action. Paul's appeal in this letter reaches beyond a personal request. It resonates as a timeless call for all of us to reflect on our own relationships. The invitation is clear: let love be the guiding force in every interaction, and let forgiveness pave the way for healing. In doing so, we not only restore bonds, but also echo the eternal message of the gospel, a message that continues to inspire and transform lives. In a time of hardship and uncertainty, the book of Hebrews was written to a community of Jewish Christians. These believers were facing persecution and a relentless pull to revert to old ways. Picture a humble congregation gathered in a modest space with tired eyes and heavy hearts, yet still searching for hope. The writer of Hebrews stands among them, not as an unreachable authority, but as a compassionate guide, urging them to hold fast to Jesus, the cornerstone of their faith. Hebrews is not merely a historical record. It is a living invitation to consider what we lean on when the storms of life batter us. Are we clinging to ephemeral things, or do we rest our trust in the unwavering strength of Jesus? For these early believers, and for us today, the message is clear: Jesus is not simply part of a bygone era. He is the radiant fulfillment of every hope and promise. The text calls us to see him as the radiance of God's glory, a presence that is both mighty and tender, embodying the divine among humanity. The writer weaves Jesus into the fabric of the Old Covenant, portraying him as the ultimate high priest and the definitive sacrifice. Unlike the endless offerings of the past, Jesus offered himself once, opening a direct, unbreakable channel between us and God. This remarkable act of love transforms our relationship with the divine, inviting us to experience freedom and assurance in every heartbeat. Hebrews challenges us to ask ourselves, are we truly living in the freedom that Jesus secured? Is he the unshakable anchor in our lives? A particularly stirring passage in Hebrews is the Faith Hall of Fame, found in chapter 11. Here, the legacy of Abraham, Moses, Rahab, and many others is celebrated. Their stories remind us that faith is not the absence of doubt, but the courage to move forward despite it. Their steadfast trust in God, even amid trials, stands as a timeless inspiration. When we feel uncertain, Hebrews gently reminds us that faith means taking that next step, trusting that our journey is woven into a grand, divine tapestry. Moreover, the text portrays life as a race, where perseverance and focus are paramount. With eyes fixed on Jesus, who endured rejection, suffering, and death, believers are called to run with determination. Every moment of hardship is transformed into an opportunity to draw strength from Him, who walks beside us through every trial. The promise of an eternal, unshakable kingdom further lifts the spirit, urging us to build our lives on the eternal rather than the fleeting. Turning to the Epistle of James, we encounter a message that is both direct and practical. James writes like a seasoned mentor, speaking plainly to believers who are eager to see their faith reflected in every aspect of their lives. His words challenge us to consider whether our beliefs are visible in our actions. James reminds us that true faith is not a matter of idle words or mere belief. It is a dynamic, living force that compels us to act with kindness, humility, and integrity. Imagine a trusted friend gently urging you to make a positive difference in the world, even when faced with hardship. That is the spirit of James, to view trials not as burdens, but as opportunities for growth and perseverance. He encourages us to embrace difficulties with joy, knowing that each challenge refines our character and deepens our resilience. One of James's most striking insights is his observation that faith without deeds is as empty as a mirror that reflects only a fleeting image. He calls us to let our actions speak as loudly as our words, ensuring that our lives are a testament to the transformative power of God's love. James's advice is both a personal challenge and a communal call to live out our faith in every gesture, every act of service, and every word spoken with care. Additionally, James warns about the power of the tongue. Although small, our words have the power to ignite change or cause destruction. Like a spark that can kindle a great fire, our speech can either build up or tear down. In today's noisy world, his counsel to use our words thoughtfully remains as relevant as ever. Next, the letters of Peter shine as beacons of hope for believers in turbulent times. Peter writes with the voice of one who has weathered storms and witnessed miracles, addressing Christians scattered and suffering. His message is one of profound encouragement. Even in the midst of trial, we are part of a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. Peter calls on us to live lives that reflect our high calling, urging us to pursue holiness not as an unattainable ideal, but as a practical way of life. His words invite us to consider our identity not as defined by a fleeting world, but as children of a loving and unchanging God. He teaches that our struggles have purpose and that our hope is anchored in the eternal promises of Christ. In his second letter, Peter adopts a tone of urgency. He warns believers to remain vigilant against false teachings and to stand firm in the truth of the gospel. His message resonates with the clarity of someone who knows that every day is a precious opportunity to grow in faith and integrity. Peter's reminders encourage us to live each moment with a sense of purpose, focused on the everlasting kingdom that awaits. The writings of John offer a tender and intimate glimpse into the heart of faith. In his first letter, John speaks as one who has closely walked with Jesus, urging believers to walk in the light and live openly before God. His language is warm and personal, inviting us to embrace both our struggles and our victories as part of a larger journey of grace and truth. For John, love is the very essence of what it means to know God. He reminds us that God is light, without a trace of darkness, and that living in this light means letting His love transform every aspect of our lives. His words challenge us to consider whether we allow that radiant love to guide our decisions and interactions with others. John's second and third letters further emphasize the importance of remaining steadfast in truth and love. He cautions against those who would twist the message of the gospel for their own gain, urging believers to remain discerning and faithful. His letters are not heavy-handed instructions, but gentle invitations to nurture the bonds of community and to let the beauty of God's truth shine through our everyday actions. Though brief, Jude's letter carries an urgency that is both compelling and heartfelt. Written by the brother of Jesus, Jude's message is a rallying cry to contend for the faith, as one would defend a precious treasure. His tone is firm yet compassionate, calling believers to be alert against those who twist God's grace into an excuse for unruly living. Jude employs vivid imagery to warn against false teachers, likening them to clouds without water and fruitless trees. His references to ancient examples, from rebellious angels to the downfall of Sodom and Gomorrah, serve as stark reminders of the consequences of straying from God's path. Yet even as he issues stern warnings, Jude also exhorts his readers to build themselves up in their most cherished faith through prayer, study, and mutual care. His message is both a call to vigilance and an invitation to grow deeper in our relationship with God. The emphasis is on nurturing a resilient faith that is active and ever-growing, drawing strength from the eternal promise that God's love will keep us steadfast. In the final book of the Bible, Revelation, the Apostle John unfolds a vision unlike any other. Written during a time of exile on the island of Patmos, Revelation is a book rich with symbolic imagery that speaks to both present struggles and the ultimate triumph of God's kingdom. John's vision begins with personal messages to 7 churches, each addressing their unique challenges. In these letters, the voice of Jesus reaches out, urging the churches to remain faithful and encouraging them to rekindle the love and fervor of their early days. These messages are as personal as they are powerful, inviting each believer to examine their hearts and renew their commitment to a life of truth. The narrative then shifts to a breathtaking panorama of heavenly worship. Imagine a throne room filled with indescribable light, where creatures and elders offer ceaseless praise, and at the center stands the Lamb, Jesus, who has triumphed over death. This vision is both majestic and intimate, reminding us that behind every trial is the promise of divine victory. As the scroll unfolds, a series of dramatic judgments sweep across the earth. Seals break, trumpets sound, and bowls of judgment pour forth. These events serve as both warnings and assurances that evil will be overcome. Amidst the turmoil, the ultimate victory of Jesus is unveiled as he returns riding a white horse, decisively defeating the forces of darkness. John's visionary account then opens our eyes to a new reality, a renewed heaven and earth, where sorrow, pain, and death have been banished. In this transformed creation, the New Jerusalem gleams with the radiance of God's glory, a place of unending life and joy, where every tear is wiped away and every heart is made whole. Revelation closes with a simple invitation to come. It is a call to everyone who thirsts, inviting them to drink freely from the water of life. John's final words echo through the ages, reminding us that Jesus is coming soon. Are we living with hearts open, ready to meet him? Thanks for watching. You can click the video on the screen to continue learning more about Scripture. May the Lord bless and guide your day.